Welcome all of you in SST College of Arts and Commerce. This is SST Edupedia. I am Assistant Professor Sanghamitra Bendkhale. Today we are learning the subject Introduction to Photography. Class SYBAMMC Semester 3 Module number 3 and today's our topic is ISO. The photography is a mixture of art and science. The photo means light and graph means to record. Hence, the meaning of photography is writing with a light. The camera is an electronic device, mechanical device with the help of which we can create stunning and beautiful images. The camera has three main controls, that is lens, shutter and aperture, and ISO also works to control the light. ISO. The ISO stands for International Standard Organization. Indicate the standard of international and it is constant across the all brands and types of camera. The ISO is a measurement of responsive your camera's sensor to the light. The lower the numeric value, less responsive, the higher the value, the more responsive. The term ISO has been widely used since the days when the film cameras are to be used. The term ISO is very popular in film cameras also. The photographers are used to use the various types of lenses, films, that is 100 ISO, 200 ISO, 400 ISO according to their subjects or objects to be covered. The ISO is related to the light sensitivity. Higher the ISO, that film is higher sensitive to the light, and lesser the number, that is that film is less sensitive to the light. But in electronic cameras, it is a simply one gear with which we can control the sensitivity of the sensor towards the light. The ISO is measured in numbers which can be anywhere from 100 to 32,000 or more. The higher the ISO number, the more sensitive sensor to the light. From these images, we can study the 100 ISO's picture, 200 ISO picture, 400 ISO picture and 800 picture. The picture has covered from 100 ISO is little dark and picture is covered with the 800 ISO is little bright. Means in 100, while we set the camera in 100 ISO, the camera is less sensitive to the light, and while we set the camera for the 800 ISO, the camera is high sensitive to the light. This situation is very useful while the photographer is working in a very low light conditions and the movements are very fast. That time the photographers are always use the high ISO setting. In olden times, the photographer has no choice on the camera gear. They have to use the different types of films. Example, if they wanted to shoot the sports photography, then they have to use the fast films because they need to capture the movements, and when we have to capture the movements means action then that time we have to use the higher speed or the higher ISO. One more example is there. These are the example of the candle. The flame is captured in 100 ISO and flame is captured in 2500 ISO. There is a vast difference. See the difference, that is in 100 ISO that the flame is very dark, and in fast ISO the flame is little bright. The available light is get captured in high ISO comparatively in low ISO, that is 100 ISO. The picture can also shows you that is the brightness is high in high ISO and the brightness is low in low ISO. Adjusting the ISO can assist you to achieve the shutter speed and aperture setting you desire to create the style of photograph you have to be in mind. ISO works in digital photography can save you from many difficult low light situations. If you want to shoot in a low light conditions, that time the high ISO setting is very useful for a photographers. In difficult situation, the press photographers or any creative photographer can take the advantage of ISO setting and he or she can create the better pictures. Exposure triangle. While choosing the exposure triangle, the ISO also very important factor. We should understand what is the exposure triangle. The shutter speed, aperture and ISO. We can compensate the shutter speed and aperture with the help of ISO also. If we want to use high shutter speed, then that time we can take the advantage of ISO. For example, if we want to shoot the 500 shutter speed, then we have to take the advantage of using high ISO because it helps, it increase your light sensitivity for the picture. In the same way, we can take aperture also. While using a deep apertures like a 16, 11, we also take the advantage of a ISO. That is, if we want to shoot at 22 aperture, we can take the advantage of a high ISO because it allows the more light or more brightness to your subject. In electronic camera, there are few buttons with which you can change immediately the ISO. By changing the gears or by changing the light conditions, you can decide what ISO you have to shoot, you have to fix. Example, if you want to shoot the batsman hitting the ball, that time you need to set the high shutter speed to grab the clear movement. That time if the light is low, the photographer is using the high ISO, or while using a long telephoto lenses, the photographer also need to use high ISO because the long tele lenses are shaking much more time than a small tele lenses. In electronic devices like a digital camera, the ISO is setting through electronic buttons. That is a inside adjustment to the cameras. In camera, we have to set the ISO in a menus. In there are multiple options are there, that we have to just choose a ISO, and there are various number of ISOs are given. Just we have to set our camera to particular ISO to get the favorable reason, to get the favorable results. Auto ISO. There is a one setting that called is auto ISO also. This means that while you have to need to shoot a particular picture with a particular aperture or a particular shutter speed, then there is no time to change the ISO according to the light condition. That time you have to set the ISO to the auto, because that time that ISO will be automatically adjusted and the picture will get in more sensible. That time, because in the field work like shooting wildlife photography, there are very fast movement and there is no time to change the camera settings or to change the ISO or shutter speed. That time the auto ISO will give you the perfect light condition which is required to particular frame. While choosing the while shooting the running or the sports photography, that time also there is no time to change the ISO in indefinite time according to the changing light conditions. That time also auto ISO setting is very useful to get the clear pictures. See the example of this, that is what is the difference between the low ISO and the high ISO. In naked eyes, it is very difficult to see the difference, because nowadays there are powerful cameras are there. We cannot immediately find what is the difference between the high ISO and low ISO, because the camera companies are giving a better and better innovations to the camera users. Just see what is the exact difference between the low ISO and the high ISO. See, this is the left side picture is a low ISO and the right side picture is a 6400 ISO. The low ISO is giving you a clean and clear picture, and the high ISO picture is little grainy. We find a little dots on the right side picture. That is, these dots is also called as a grains. Now this grainy picture it won't give you that much sharp effect, and these grain pictures is you don't the people are not getting a superior quality of print also because of this grain quality. In lifestyle journalism, while covering fashion pictures, the high ISO is also, or a auto ISO setting is also useful, because the photographer need to finish his assignments quickly in available light conditions. And sometimes while covering the magazine interviews or big fashion shows, there is no space to setting the lights, or there is no place to adjust the situation. So that time the auto ISO is also very useful for a press photographer or also for a magazine photographers. Fashion portraits in available light. The high ISO also very useful to cover the portraits in available light, because the high ISO helps to click the pictures in a low light situation. What do you mean by the grains? Now see the picture. There is a four difference, that is ISO 100 and ISO. That right side shows you the fast ISO. The higher the ISO setting means your camera sensor is more responsive to the light. So it needs less light to reach the sensor to create a well exposed photograph. Choosing a higher ISO setting is best when the light is low or you are not able to make the long exposure. It also means that technical quality of your images may be affected by a digital noise, colors may less, a vibrant or overall image is contrast is flatter. Depends on how high you have your ISO setting and the camera model. Freezing a moment and high ISO helpful in low light. This picture shows you, this is a very fast movement picture and light is very low. This time you have to, the photographer need to adjust a high ISO. Clean and no grains, that is a very low ISO and very good light condition allows you the clean with a no grain quality. During a night photography also, the high ISO is also useful in a night photography also. In wildlife photography, the photographer is also enjoying the high ISO setting to capture the fast movement of the animals and or the birds. And during the fashion also, the press photographers also using a high ISO setting. Thank you very much.